Alright, in this R video, we are going to go over reading in data in Rstudio and how that's possible and what you need to do, specifically for text files, CSV files, and Excel files. And there are lots of other formats that work as well. But basically, to begin, Rstudio needs to be able to find the data you want to consume. And that has to deal with your file structure. And so the first thing that you need to do is decide kind of where you want to put the data set, whether it's your CSV file or your text file, where you want to save it on your computer. And so you really have two options after you save it somewhere. You set your working directory within Rstudio to that location, or this is my preferred way, move your data set to your project structure, this R foundations up here. This is my project. You can see right here I have all my files in here, and I keep all my data sets within here, assets. And so basically, if you want to figure this out, you say, where am I right now? And you get wd parentheses, which is get working directory, and I know that Rstudio is looking at this location right now. And if I wanted to change that, which I don't in this case, I would say set working directory, and then I'd just put in the file path to the desired location. So if this is where I wanted to be, I would have to figure out this file path and put it right there. And then run that line, and it'll set the directory to your project. And I think naturally the working directory should be directed at your project, but yeah, you'll have to set that if you want to go somewhere else besides your project. It's important to know that there are lots of different types of files that you can read into Rstudio and with R. There's the text, TXT files, CSV, Excel, JSON, XML, HTML tables even, and various types of databases. So it's pretty powerful, and there's been lots of packages that have been written to include all of this functionality to pull in data sets from all over the place. So let's jump in and look into how we can do it with a TXT file and read that data in. So we're going to be using a function called read table. And in this case, this doesn't require any additional packages, and so you should just be able to get up and running quickly with a read table. And so what we have going on here is I have a file name named asset, or within my assets folder right here, and it's called sample text file.txt, and that is located right here. And to read this in, we're going to be using read table, read.table. And there's lots, as you can see, lots of arguments or parameters that you can throw in there to specify how exactly you want the data read in to R. So if we just do it as it is written here, I saved pretty much this string into this variable, and I want to save the data. I'm going to say read.table, the file name, and I'm going to save that into my txt data. So it brought back what we expected. If that looks crazy and nonsensical to you, it's probably because it is. It's just kind of random data that I put in that I'm reading in from a text file. Another way to do this is have the same variable name, read.table, and you don't have to save it in a file name. You can just put the direct path to that file right here, and you can run it and you'll get the same results. So the most common separating values, let's talk about that real quick. So this is in the documentation for read.table, and as you can see, SEP stands for separator character, and that's a common argument that you'll use because it deals with kind of what is separating each value of the data. So if you've worked with a CSV file, you know that is short for a comma separated values. So another common one is a pipe, and it just looks like just like that. And another one is fixed spaces. And that happens to be how this file, this txt, the random one, was organized. There's a fixed number of spaces in between. And that's the default, actually, for read.table, is that it'll pick up on spaces. So let's go ahead and compare how we can get data out of different sources, like a CSV. So CSV is comma separated, and actually it is in the data input function options. So again, I have a sample data.csv saved in the assets right here. And let's go ahead and read that in. And then we're going to use the same function as we did above, read.table, and read that CSV file in. And we're going to look at the differences. So it looks like read.csv, my CSV data, it brought in the data that we wanted, and it's organized in the way that we want as well. Everything's spaced properly, and everything looks great. On the other hand, if we look at my CSV data 1, which was read in by read.table, it's a mess. We're not quite sure what's going on here, but if we look into it a little bit more, read.table, as I said, the default is this fixed space. So you'd have to specify down here the argument separator is a comma. So if we run that and pull it up, now it looks like what we would expect. So the CSVs are so common that they have created this singular function that handles the comma separated values in and of itself without needing to pass in this extra argument. So CSV files are kind of the bread and butter, probably one of the most common ways to read data in if you're just doing kind of personal projects and pulling data from data sets that you find on the web. They're commonly found in CSV format. So let's go to Excel format, an Excel file. Now one way you could do this is that you could go to an Excel file and resave it as a comma separated value file, and that should work. But if it's an Excel workbook that you're wanting to get into, you're going to need this package, Excel Connect. So run library Excel Connect, and now we've read in that that library. And yours might, if you run that for the first time in a project, you might have more text than I did. So don't worry if it showed up with more. You can do !_ Excel Connect to learn more about it. So if we look here, it looks like there is some additional documentation, not necessarily provided by R, but by different sources. I'm going to allow you to go there yourself and read through that documentation if you want to learn more about the functionality, but I'm also going to cover the basics of it right now, reading in data from an Excel workbook. So I'll create a variable, my Excel data, and I'll use one of the functions, load workbook. So load workbook accepts a file name, create, and password. So these are additional, unnecessary, optional, whatever you want to call it, arguments. And really, it just needs a file name. It needs you to tell you, it needs to know where to go look. So we're going to go back into the assets folder and say Excel data sample.xlsx. And we'll run that. Uh-oh. Error in view, cannot coerce class structure, workbook, blah, blah, blah. What is that talking about? Well, it's saying that there's some problem with reading in the data that it can't get it to a data frame, which is the ultimate goal of load workbook. And so the reason for that is that you're trying to load a whole workbook. And if you're familiar with how Excel files are structured, a whole workbook contains multiple sheets. And so if you try and load the whole workbook, it won't know which sheet to go and find. So what you need to do is load in the workbook in and of itself with load workbook. And we'll load in the workbook. And I'm going to say, okay, now I'm going to get my data, because I'm going to say read worksheet. And let's look at read worksheet. So we need the object, which is the workbook, right down here, the workbook to use, and the sheet. So you can say, okay, the first sheet in that workbook. Now, let's take a look at what we have. My Excel data. And this is exactly what's in the file that I have. It only has 4 rows and just kind of made up data that I have included. Now if you look over here, some other interesting things that you can do. If the worksheet within the workbook contains more information than just this table you're looking at, you can tell it which row and which column to start with and which one to end with as well. And so that'll be pretty powerful if you've got a complicated workbook that you're trying to read in and you want to get just specific things out of it. So another way to do all of this that we did up here, you can do it in one line, my Excel data, and you can say read worksheet from file. So let's go ahead and read about that. So this kind of bypasses some of the work we did here, and it reads it directly, and you can specify which sheet within this workbook that you're reading in. So if we run that, it should give us same information, and it did. So we are we're going in the right direction. So another file type that you can read in is a JSON file. And this is really simple with the RJSON data type, or not data type, but the package. And you read that in RJSON, and you can go to json.org and to figure out how to read JSON objects in. And basically, you'll use this function from JSON and give it the object that you want to convert, or the file here, and you run it. And I don't have a JSON example, but it seems pretty basic. So XML file is just about the same thing. You load a library, you learn how to use the library, and you have all the documentation here that you need. So if you're interested in either one of those, the JSON or the XML, I hope that from looking at these Excel files and the CSV files, you've kind of got an idea that reading in data involves creating a variable name and kind of the read function, whatever it is, and then usually it wants where the data is located, where the file is, whatever it may be, and extra parameters. That's the basic format that pretty much all of them follow. So good luck with reading in data. I hope this was helpful for foundational understanding of reading data into R.